What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. The New York Giants have had quite an eventful offseason thus far. I know they're technically only getting started. The draft just a little over a month away. Actually, I think it's a month from today. Super excited for that. But the New York Giants in free agency, they got a little busy. Joe Schoen, he was all over the place, signing players, trading for players, extending players. And on the offensive side of the ball in particular, I feel like the New York Giants have made some massive upgrades, some big roster moves to really bolster this team and get ready for the 2023 season. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the Giants offseason so far on the offensive side of the ball and grade some of these big-time moves that Joe Schoen has made this offseason, discuss what we like about him, what we don't like about him, the risks and the rewards with each and every signing that the New York Giants have made on the offensive side of the ball so far. So we're going to go ahead and dive into all of that, but before we do, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. But without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today? And what is your initial thoughts on Joe Schoen's offseason, his second offseason with the New York Giants?
Hey man, I'm doing great. I hope you're doing well. This is definitely an exciting time for Giants fans in general, right? We have a competent front office, a competent group of decision makers, and we're not strapping ourselves down for the future financially either, which is definitely a good thing because right now, we're kind of reflecting on our past, reflecting on the massive spending sprees we went on that amounted to absolutely nothing. And what did we learn, Anthony? We learned that big spending, big free agency acquisitions don't necessarily result in wins. So I like this approach a lot more strategical, a lot more beneficial for our long-term future, especially because we want to retain a lot of our big guys. And we've made some really efficient moves this offseason, to bolster the offensive side and give Daniel Jones the quality he needs to maximize the 4-year extension he did land. And let's start with Darren Waller, because that's the obvious, most prevalent move, the most prominent decision to bring in a guy who can offer wide receiver 1 level production for this Giants team. Now, you wrote an article this morning discussing all of the grades you gave to the offensive acquisitions, which we're going to do right now. And you gave Darren Waller an A-. And I think I'm actually kind of right on par with you. This is a low-risk, high-reward type of acquisition. He has 2 years of 1,000-plus yards under his belt, a good number of touchdowns, and he has a ton of potential in this scheme with an offense that really maximizes tight end positions based on what the Kansas City Chiefs did or currently do with Travis Kelce and Mike Kafka coming from that kind of school of thought, that train of thought. So Waller, with some of the best speed at the tight end position in this entire NFL league, you're looking at a player who can offer you wide receiver 1 production from the position when he is healthy. Of course, when he is healthy is a big variable to consider there. But, if the Giants are, able to capitalize on that when he is on the field, it's going to be an absolute steal, and the cap hit is just tremendous. So, Anthony, tell me a little bit more about the financial situation of this and why you think an A- is a good, round grade for Darren Waller.
Yeah, so I wanted an A- kind of for the reasons that you mentioned there in terms of his injury history, because with Darren Waller, the injuries do play a part in the conversation. If he had no injury history and the Giants just stole this superstar tight end for a third-round pick, then yes, it's an A+. But because of the injuries, there is some risk involved. Now, I still think that it's a very low-risk, high-reward move for Darren Waller because of the contract. The Giants really are not sacrificing much for their future in terms of the contract for Darren Waller that they inherited. But when you take a look at it, his career has been a little bit muddied down over the past couple of seasons by some injuries, and there is some risk involved with trading for a 30-year-old tight end with an injury history. Now, here's the thing, though. The Giants trading away a third-round pick, the 100th overall pick in the draft, for a top 100 potential player in the NFL. Like, that's what I love about this move, and I think that it's so low risk when you're talking about that 100th overall pick. But I won't say that there's just no shot of this, not panning out. But that's why the Giants built in this contract to have an out after one more season. They did restructure the deal. They could have cut him immediately next season with zero penalty. Now they will cut him, but incur some sort of penalty, but it's still not much. They can cut him next offseason. I think the penalty is only about $7 million or so. The Darren Waller contract is like the most flexible contract. That's why the Giants went ahead and restructured him. So potential out in 2024, they can cut him with a dead cap hit of $7.86 million, which is basically nothing. But they can also save a boatload of money if they were to release him in the coming years. So there's really no risk involved, in my opinion, with the Darren Waller cut, because with the Darren Waller contract, because releasing him, you're going to save over $7 million, as well as having a dead cap of $7 million. But here's the thing. The Giants don't want to cut him next year. That's not what they want to see happen. They want him to play out his contract, which doesn't expire until 2026. So what you're getting with Darren Waller is a veteran player, a long-term solution for your offense, giving you that dominant receiving threat that you needed from the tight end position, a dynamic weapon. And as the Giants continue to search for that WR1, if they find it, think about how amazing this offense can be with a true dominant outside wide receiver and a truly dynamic tight end. Those two will play in tandem together. So this Darren Waller trade looks amazing on paper right now. We'll see if he stays healthy and plays, but if he does, it has the potential to be an even better deal down the line based on what talent the Giants add around Darren Waller, because Darren Waller being the number one receiving threat in your offense, being the focal point of your offense, that's great. But imagine if he's not the number one receiving threat. He's the number two, because the Giants go out there and find the WR1 either this offseason or next offseason. Well, then you're talking about Darren Waller having matchup nightmares every time he's on the field, because he's not going against the best of the best. That's going to be the job for the WR1. So I love this deal. Again, A- just because of the injuries. There is a little bit of risk involved, but there's not much. I love the contract that Darren Waller has attached to his name, and I really think that this is the premier acquisition for the Giants this offseason. A blockbuster deal by Joe Schoen, exactly what they needed.
Absolutely. And if you look at the Giants and they end up adding another wide receiver at 25, you have a really nice group of playmakers. And look, Waller, as you mentioned before, has the quality to be kind of wide receiver one production. You add another guy to that mix that can offer that as well, you're going to have a pretty potent offense. So Waller, really low risk, high reward type of signing. Of course, the health variable is something that I do want to keep in focus. He needs to be healthy for him to produce. But hopefully this new turf and the way the Giants kind of operate moving forward will help mitigate any injuries in the future. Now let's move on to Paris Campbell. Paris Campbell, really good contract here. This is probably my favorite contract of the entire offseason, mainly because this entire deal guarantees that if they pay him the maximum, I think the minimum is $3 million. So $3 million for Paris Campbell in itself is a good deal. But if he actually makes the full $7 million, he has to have a career season and play every game to do it. He gets paid for being healthy, he gets paid for producing, and he's got to just be dominant in all phases to really make the most of this contract. So the Giants incentive laid in this deal, and if he reaches those numbers and he reaches all of those incentives, the Giants are getting a ridiculous level of production from him, which is a really good situation to be in. This is paying for upside, and ultimately, this is a player who has really great speed. He can be a return man. He can run out of the slot mostly. He can do a lot of stuff for you, and that speed combination with Darius, Slayton, and others is what Joe Schoen was trying to do this offseason. We had one of the slowest wide receiver cores in football last year. Joe Schoen said, no, not anymore. We're adding speed this offseason. Goes out, gets Paris Campbell, obviously brings in a couple other guys. Waller, fastest tight end in football. You're getting guys here who offer you that athleticism variable that expands the field, pushes defensive backs deeper. It opens up opportunities in the running game, opens up play action, opens up crossers, opens up drag routes to your guys from the slot. Wan'Dale Robinson, think about how much space he's going to have with all the speed on this team now that's going to really push defenses deeper into the field, so there's a lot more room to work with where guys that are shifty like him can operate. So Paris Campbell, you gave him a B+. I think that's a pretty reasonable thing just because he doesn't have a lot of value on the outside. We have a lot of slot receivers when it comes to Wan'Dale, Shep, and others. So, and then Jamison Crowder, who we just added, who can kind of do a little bit of both, mostly a slot guy. But Paris Campbell, B+. The upside of the contract is tremendous. Honestly, I'd even be okay with an A- there too, because the contract is so incentive laden and he's got to hit so many career highs just to get those markers. I really love this deal. I love how he has to have a career year for him to really produce the financial, results that he wants. And the Giants obviously benefit from that, and Daniel Jones directly. So I love this deal. One of the better signings of this offseason. And we talked about Paris Campbell weeks before this happened, and I'm really happy to see it came to fruition.
1000% me too. I think that the Paris Campbell has so much potential to just explode in this offense. And one of the things that I kind of disagree with you there is that I think he's got the ability to play both inside and outside. He played a lot of snaps on the outside for Indianapolis. He will probably primarily play in the slot for the New York Giants, but I do think he has the ability to just kind of move around a little bit and kind of just place him where you think the best matchup is, whether that be on the outside or on the inside. Again, primarily on the inside. But the reason I gave it a B plus and not an A or an A minus or anything like that is because I do just want to point out the fact that this is very much a low risk, high reward deal because of the contract. However, there's more risk than there was for Darren Waller, because when you're talking about injuries for Paris Campbell versus Darren Waller doesn't have the same amount of injury history that Paris Campbell has, because Paris Campbell's injury history is extensive. This past season, he played in all 17 games for the Indianapolis Colts. That was phenomenal, but that was the first time in his career that he even reached double digits games played in a single season. Prior to this past season, 2019, he played his most games in a season with 7 in total. 2020, he played in only 2 games. 2021, he played in only 6 games. So, 2022, him playing 17 games is the anomaly. That is not the standard for him. So there's a realistic chance that the Giants sign Paris Campbell and he plays 5 to 8 games for them this season. So I just want to keep that in mind. I didn't want to give this an A plus because, yes, it's a low cap hit. It's only a $5 million cap hit for the 2023 season. There's definitely some room to extend him this upcoming offseason if they want to go that route. There's not a lot of dead cap hit either. They could actually cut him at the end of training camp if they even wanted to and save some money. I don't think that'll happen. I'm confident in Paris Campbell. If he stays healthy, he's going to be a weapon in the Giants offense, but staying healthy is a big if for him, which is why I'm only giving this a B plus, not going to give it an A or anything like that, just because I know that there is a lot of risk involved with Paris Campbell. And listen, there is an argument to be made, though, that those 7 games that he might play for you, if he doesn't play the full season, ends up playing only 7 games, they're probably worth the $5 million cap hit, because he's probably going to go out there and have a big impact in those games. So, again, I do really love the deal, but the injuries are very concerning. But let's talk about one of the players that the Giants extended this offseason, Alex, and that's Darius Slayton. Now, if you didn't know, and go ahead, read some quotes on it. It's really interesting because Slayton actually provided a lot of insight on his process through free agency before signing with the Giants. He talked about how it was actually a very difficult decision for him. He was very close to signing with the Atlanta Falcons. That's his hometown team. He has a lot of family in the Atlanta area. The Giants had to pry him back from his family and say, come back to New York, we're building something. And the main reason that he did re-sign with the Giants was that Daniel Jones just got paid his bag. He was really excited about that, Darius Slayton said. He's actually said that he was more excited to see Daniel Jones get the deal that he got than he was for the deal that he got himself. So Slayton, super excited to rejoin the Giants, continue to keep that continuity with Daniel Jones. 2-year, $12 million contract, $6 million on average annually. Very cheap deal. I love this contract. I actually think that this is an A plus for the New York Giants, because think about how they had to fight through the market. It was a competitive market, a bidding war for Darius Slayton, and it sounds like he chose to play for them for less money than he could have on another team like the Falcons. Additionally, this is way under market value. A lot of fans were thinking that Darius Slayton was getting at least $10 million on average annually, and he only gets 6. So I really like this deal. I think it's a bargain for a truly reliable player. He doesn't miss a lot of time with injuries. Yes, maybe he's hampered with them sometimes, but he always finds a way to get his ass on the field. I really like Darius Slayton. I like the way that he plays. I know he's not a perfect player by any means, but when you're talking about a solid WR2 or WR3, that's Darius Slayton. So for $6 million per year for 2 years, that's a perfect deal to me. Alex, what are your thoughts on the extension of Slayton?
Look, Slayton is more of a benefit than a liability. He's more of an asset than a liability, right? The drops are referenced heavily. Everyone knows about the drops. Everyone, has definitely clamored on about it, including us. And that's not to say that I haven't been critical, and we are justifiably critical for what it's worth. I think that there have been moments where he's made mistakes that, we can say, okay, like, you can't do that, man. You got to catch that football. It was right in your hands. It was a big moment. But he's also come up in a couple of big ways. The crossers last year that he ran, the speed, he was easily our biggest separator, and it wasn't even close. So having him back is not a problem. It's certainly a benefit. The contract is healthy. Again, they got him on a good deal, and he decided he wanted to come back, took a little bit of a pay cut probably to do so. 2 years, $12 million, $6 million. The chemistry he has with Daniel Jones, as you referenced, is certainly a big deal, in my opinion. And it gives Daniel Jones that familiarity with the offense. And, you bring in guys like Paris Campbell, Jamison Crowder, Darren Waller. He has no chemistry with these guys yet. So he has a reliable target that expands the field. As I mentioned before, the speed variable. Paris Campbell's got 4.32 speed. Darius Slayton's got really great speed. They're going to push defenses deeper, and it's going to really open up space underneath. So when you have that space underneath, the crossing routes we saw from Slayton last year, where if the offensive line can hold up, and that's a big if, Slayton's going to find himself wide open on the other side of the field because of that speed and because of that ability to, undercut those routes and really just do a lot of good things on this offensive side and extrapolate on his skill set. But personally, I totally kind of felt a couple of weeks ago, like, all right, you know what? If we go out and trade for a Hopkins or trade for a big guy, get a big name that is a wide receiver, aside from Waller, like I could see them letting Darius Slayton go. But because of how affordable Darren Waller's contract is, it made it a lot easier for them to bring back Slayton, right? They didn't bring in a guy who's going to be costing $20 million cap hit, $20 million. They took that money and they said, okay, we can go out and get a low risk, high reward guy in Darren Waller, and we still have a ton of money left over, which they built incentives into Paris Campbell's contract, and they gave $6 million a year to Darius Slayton. I don't know exactly what the guarantees are, but I imagine they can move on if they wanted to after 1 year anyway. So I personally feel as though now that is a really great move based on all the different things that they did. Speed wins at the end of the day. NFL is becoming an offensive game. Having great wide receiver depth is not a problem. I think Slayton's a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3, and a good offense. So if the Giants go out and draft a receiver at 25, you still got Isaiah Hodgins, who I also think is like a mid-range, ceiling as a mid-range wide receiver 2. And Slayton, like if he didn't drop all those passes, he'd be a high-end wide receiver 2, I think, Slayton. But because of the drops, you have to kind of negate it a little bit. But with that being said, really good player for us, has been for a long time. He's one of the only guys that have produced on this offense when we've had a lot of injuries and other things. He took that demotion last year in stride, fought his way back into the starting unit, and performed and played admirably. So I respect the Giants showing loyalty, committing to their players, and doing what's right by them, because ultimately it helps everyone else. It really gives everybody else motivation and confidence to play well, and it just feeds back into this entire cultural narrative that we've been trying to build here for so long. So if I had to give Slayton a grade, I say it's a B+. It's a good deal. It's fine to bring him back. Could you find speed at the back end of the draft? Absolutely. But you don't find that chemistry with Daniel Jones, and you don't find that reliability that he's shown in the past. So I think that his quality and the understanding of how to play in the NFL definitely goes a long way, and it's nice to have him back.
I agree, and I think it's really nice to have another player back who's been here for a long time. The longest tenured New York Giants player is Sterling Shepard. He's extended on a 1-year deal with a cap hit of only $1,054,375. That is as cheap as it gets. It's an average annual salary of 1 year, $1.3 million. This is like the bare minimum for a player who's been in the NFL for a long time, been with the New York Giants for a long time. I love this deal because I think that when you look at that cap hit of barely $1 million, I mean, you're getting all of that value just based on the leadership that he brings to the locker room in my eyes. I know that Sterling Shepard is past his prime. He's had too many injuries. He's not going to be a wide receiver 2 on this team anymore. He's not going to go out there and dominate in the regular season. It's just not going to happen. But he's going to make an impact in the locker room, on the sidelines, and as a backup reserve player, rotational piece, jumps into the offense when someone needs a breather and gives you a few snaps per game that are definitely going to be crucial and clutch down the stretch. So I think that this is an excellent deal. This is another one that I give an A+. I give the extension of Slayton and Shepard both an A+, because so cheap, so far under the market value, but so impactful in many different ways. And I think when you look at the Sterling Shepard contract, considering how cheap it is and what an impact he had this past season all in the locker room, pretty much being a coach on the sideline, he didn't have to do all that. I mean, listen, guys, a lot of players get injured. They don't even show up to the games. They're not on the sidelines. They're at home. Shepard, out there with torn ligaments, was just going crazy on the sideline, hyping up his team and making sure that he continued to be the best teammate he possibly could be day in and day out. So you look at that really low cap hit of just $1 million, just over $1 million, it's worth it to me. And I think that especially considering the fact that, yes, he does all those great things on the sideline and in the locker room, but when he's on the field, he's still a very good player when he's healthy. And I think that there is potential for him to make a few crucial plays down the stretch, whether that be a big third down reception or maybe a red zone touchdown. I still think that Shepard has some sort of juice left in him. Again, not the player he used to be, but he's still a good player when he's healthy. So really excited and happy that Shep is back for, I believe this is his 8th season now with the New York Giants. Again, longest tenured Giants player. I'm really excited about it. But Alex, how excited are you to see young Shep take the field in Big Blue again?
Look, it's a low risk, high reward signing again. It's a veteran minimum deal, guys. Like, think about how many players we had on the roster last year that we would have died to get off the roster. I mean, Tate Crowder was a disaster. Think about Marcus Johnson. Would you rather look at Sterling Shepard's making about just as much as Marcus Johnson was last year, guys? Okay, would you rather have Marcus Johnson or Sterling Shepard? That's the argument that we're gonna have right now. It's Sterling Shepard every day of the freaking week and twice on Sundays. So with that being said, really, really cheap. Sterling Shepard is a tremendous locker room presence. He's basically a coach in a player's uniform, and he can go on there and still produce at a decent level. And for what it's worth, and I'm going to continue saying this, I do not see Sterling Shepard as a legitimate everyday starter anymore. I see him as a utility piece, just as you referenced before. If the Giants need someone to step in and start, he can do it. If they need someone to come in a certain package, he can do it. If they want to use him in whatever way, outside, inside, Z, X, slot, he can do it, and he's a decent enough run blocker too. And he's going to help all of those youngsters kind of round out their game. Guys like Hodgins, even Slayton, really good friends. Obviously, Barkley's still on the team. He's really good buddies with him. And if they draft someone at 25 or bring in someone in the mid rounds, who knows? Sterling Shepard's going to help them get acclimated and help produce at an NFL level immediately. This is like the cheapest contract you can get for a player of his quality. And I think that the injuries, yes, are prevalent, but I don't want to depend on him as an every game player, but more a utility piece that if you don't use him as prominently as we did in the past, he's going to be healthy down the stretch. He's going to be healthy for a potential postseason run where he's usually injured. And that's where we want him to be. That's what a great strategy might look like, is just him being healthy because we're using him as a utility piece and not like overdoing it with him. And I think that's where we're going to see the most value down the stretch, where he's healthy and can actually help this team when it matters most. So Sterling Shepard, A+. That's the easiest decision I've ever seen. Really good move by the Giants to bring him back. If you disagree, I just don't think that you understand how cheap and how many wasted roster spots NFL teams have. Think about how many guys we had last year that should not have been on this team, right? Like I said, would you trade Marcus Johnson for Sterling Shepard? I imagine most of you would agree that yes, that's a good move. So if you don't want Sterling Shepard, maybe you're really wrapped up in the injuries, but look, NFL's full of injuries. You never know when someone's going to go down. We still need guys to replace, Wan'Dale Robinson. They've been working out together. They've been training together, recovering from the ACL tear. So he's just a good guy to have in the locker room, and that intangible value he brings, you can't put a monetary value on that. So I do think that that's another thing to kind of bring up and definitely focus on.
1,000%. I mean, Shep's impact in the locker room, you can't say enough great things about what he did for the team this past season. But the last kind of cluster of players that I want to talk about, I grouped these together in the article that I wrote this morning. I just said depth signings, B+, because none of these guys really stand out. No one here is probably going to see a bunch of playing time in the regular season. At least we hope that we don't have any of these guys see a lot of playing time, because that'll mean that once again the Giants are decimated with injuries. But the signings of guys like Jeff Smith, Tommy Sweeney, and of course Jamison Crowder, I really like these deals. They're all, as we know, low cost, low risk deals for just some veteran players. But the main takeaway that I have from this is that last offseason, the New York Giants went into the regular season with not enough depth. They got injured, they lost a bunch of players, and then all of a sudden, Darius Slayton, who was the 6th string wide receiver at the time, became the 1st string wide receiver. Now that's a problem, because when you don't have quality depth, the players that shouldn't even be playing are going to be in the first lineup, and that's not what we want here. So I like that the Giants have made a priority here to go ahead and just fill out the bottom portion of that roster. And there was a quote from Brian Dable. I broke it down yesterday. We mainly talked about what he said about Daniel Jones, but there was also a quote in there where he was discussing his mindset going into the second season as a New York Giants head coach. And he said, yes, we laid a good foundation last year. It was great, but we made a lot of mistakes, and we're trying to learn from them. And so we're trying to really just put into practice what we learned this offseason from the mistakes we made last offseason. And I think one of the big mistakes that he's definitely alluding to is the lack of depth that the Giants had on the offensive side of the ball. You could argue that on defense they had a decent amount of depth, but really the Giants, they were strapped for cash last offseason. They really couldn't fill out their roster. But this year, yes, they made a lot of top-end moves. We just discussed a few of them. Darren Waller, Campbell, those were great moves. But the real impact that the Giants are making this offseason is the fact that they're being steadfast in their approach and actually filling out the bottom half of their roster with quality depth, so that if they do get into a pinch in the regular season, they have some players that they feel they can rely on and continue to win games despite not having their starters in the lineup. So I give this a B+ because, again, nobody here really stands out, but the approach definitely gets an A+. Just the mindset of the New York Giants to continue to grab a bunch of bottom of the barrel, bottom of the roster players and just fill it out with quality depth. Keep in mind, there's still guys like Colin Johnson on the roster who we haven't heard about in a while. He got injured very late into the offseason last year, but he'll be back as well. So there's a lot of depth on the back end of this roster, primarily in the receiving core, and I think that's something that Giants fans can feel a little bit more comfortable going into this regular season than they did going into last regular season because of the amount of depth that the Giants have on the back end of this roster. So, Alex, what are your thoughts on that? Just the new approach from the New York Giants, not just to be a top-heavy team, but to really just fill out this roster and make sure that they cover up all of their weaknesses with quality depth.
Look, I mean, we know how important depth is at this point in time, guys. Like, we've seen what not having depth means. It means picking guys up off the street. We got lucky enough to land Isaiah Hodgins in the process of doing that, but that's not a realistic thing to consider every time this happens. We need to be prepared for injuries. They have been prevalent for many years with the Giants, and they're doing a great job. Jamison Crowder's a good player when he's healthy. He can return kicks. He can, feature in the slot, can move outside. He's had a really, really solid career. Didn't play much last year because I think he fractured his foot, if I'm not mistaken. But, Jamison Crowder's fine. This is a good situation. You still have Colin Johnson, by the way, coming back from the ACL tear, who was looking awesome during summer in training camp and some of those preseason games that, we're really excited about him as well. So there are guys on this roster that can fill those depth roles. The Giants built out their depth plus some good wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s. Now it's just finding the last piece to the puzzle. Now we discussed Darren Waller being that wide receiver 1 production, but they still need that top gun. I still think there's like a 60% chance they draft a receiver at 25. I do think that cornerback is like a 40% chance because finding starting corners is difficult. So with that being said, I think we're looking at a probable scenario where we have another receiver adding to the mix in the draft, which would be awesome. And then maybe we get a center in the second round. But maybe this is enough for what they wanted. Maybe they wait until next year and try to get Marvin Harrison Jr., who's like going to be a perennial like Pro Bowler, but he's going to be a top 5 pick probably. So I don't think we're going to be within range of that. So you're probably not going to be waiting a year to find Marvin Harrison Jr. on your doorstep. But maybe they just try and work with what they've got, get themselves a wide receiver 1 next year. Maybe they try to maybe what they end up doing is trading for one at the deadline this year. You know what I mean? Maybe they're like, you know what? We can get a guy right now. We're making a playoff push, a guy that can help us down the stretch and for the future. And they bring him in at the trade deadline and they don't make that move right now. They don't draft a guy. They wait until seeing maybe a bad team is looking to offload some players, maybe rebuild a little bit. And maybe they bring in Hopkins after most of his contract's been paid already and they make sure he's healthy. They have him help us for the next year and a half. So that could be an opportunity as well. Like there are different avenues they can take regarding, building out the rest of this roster and filling that wide receiver 1 situation. But the depth that they've built this offseason already is certainly something to be appreciative of and is certainly something to be happy about. So, I'm ecstatic about the strategy we've implemented and I'm excited to see what they kind of continue to do as the future unfolds before us.
As am I, and I'm really excited about the present-day New York Giants. I think that Joe Shane, Brian Daboll, they are building something super special, and there's so much to talk about with this team, and of course we're going to continue talking about it and updating you all right here on Fireside Giants. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you are new. Ring the bell so you do not miss an episode. Leave a like if you did enjoy this episode and comment your thoughts and your grades down below in the comment section. We will catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.